So I am thrilled, and I mean that literally, thrilled to welcome Tim Cook to the stage. Okay, so just a few ground rules for a moment. Tim and I are going to have a conversation for about the next 25 or so minutes. You know, one of the things we didn't figure out is how I can see those clocks over there. So Anna, give me a high sign when it's time to move on. There you go. So we have a conversation for about 20, 25 minutes, but then it's your turn. Specifically, it's your job then to think of the questions you'd like to ask. I'll tell you in advance, I'm going to call on students more so than grown-ups. Three rules. Tell us who you are, make it a question, not a statement, and make it short. So you can think about that while Tim and I are starting this conversation. So Tim, I don't want to start with you as CEO. I want to start with you as that young person in 1982, or maybe that other young person in 1988. Did you think you were going to be here? Where did you think you were headed in your life? This is what these students are dealing with right now. So where were you, where was that young Tim Cook?
Yeah, let me say, first of all, it's a privilege to be invited to one of the finest universities in the world.
The #1 university.
You know, in 1982, I was about 21 years old and coming out of undergraduate school. And the key thing I wanted to do was fairly selfish at that time. I wanted to find a job that I loved. And I wanted to love the work that I did. I no longer have that goal. But that was sort of my focus and objective, was to come out and get a job that I loved, because I had grown up in a very lower middle-class family. My dad was a shipbuilder, and very blue-collar background. And I saw my dad go to work and not love what he did. He worked for his family and poured his life in so that we'd have a great family life. But he never loved what he did. And so I wanted to get a job that I loved. And by the time I was in Duke, I had worked 6 years or so out of undergraduate school. I went to Duke, and I had begun to think through, you know, what is my purpose in life? And I was struggling with a lot of things, both personally and professionally at that time. And it began to dawn on me then that the purpose of life wasn't to love your job. It was to serve humanity in a broad way. And that the outcome of doing that would mean that you would love your job. And I began to realize I wasn't in a place to do that. And sometime thereafter, I began to switch companies and jobs and sort of be on this search. And then one day, out of the blue, Steve has come back to Apple and essentially fired everybody that was working for him at that time. And so he began to recruit. I'd never met Steve before. And it was only after joining Apple where my values and my work aligned. And that has made all the difference for me.
So let's take it at that point.
Yeah.
So at that point, if my memory is right, Apple's sales had dropped to half of what they were 5 years before. I think it went from 11 to 6 billion in sales.
Yeah.
Publicly, you've said in other places that people that you respected told you not to do this. This was a leap. And entrepreneurs out there are times you're going to have to take a leap. So how did you take that leap?
Well, You're right. Actually, the people that I respected the most that knew me, some that knew the situation at Apple, at least on a cursory basis, 100% said, you should not do this. You would be leaving the number one PC company in the world that has a great future, and you would be going to a company that's going out of business. In fact, Michael Dell had just said if he were the CEO of Apple, he would close it down and give any remaining money to the shareholders, because it was clear that the book had been written, the last chapter had been written, it was just a matter of the chapters in between. And there was something in me after meeting Steve where somebody was saying, go west, young man, go west. And I wasn't sure why. You know, I did what an engineer does. I made a list of pluses and minuses. I ran a spreadsheet. They both told me I should stay put. But my intuition was saying something different. And I listened to my intuition. And that was like one of the most important decisions of my life, maybe the most important.
So I want to kind of flip a bit, and not to talk about Apple as Apple, but again, I'm trying to target this to the students out there. So one of the things that we know that successful businesses have to do is stay attuned to customers. If you lose your customer, you lose your business. Apple has not only kind of stayed attuned to customers, but stayed ahead of them. Just out of curiosity, how many people in here own an Apple product?
Thank you.
Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up for a minute. How many of you own more? So take your hands down. How many of you own more? Actually, keep them up for a minute. Sorry. All right. How many of you own only one product? If so, take your hands down. How many of you own more than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Many things.
Yeah. Right? You have, by some estimates, 600 million customers in the world. That may be a wrong number, but some analysts gave that number. Trying to stay close to your customers when you've got 600 million customers all over the world must be really tough. How does Apple stay close to knowing what customers want and need? And then at a different level, how are these young people trying to start up businesses? How would you recommend they stay close to what it is that the customer either knows that they need or doesn't know yet what they need?
Yeah, I think for technology, but I think this is also true in many other industries, the things, I don't know if you're teaching this in business school, but I know
If not, we will.
Well, you don't want to teach this. At Duke, I remember going through a course in marketing, and it said, step 1, set up a focus group. Step 2, ask people what they want. Step 3, deliver. Well, as it turns out, that doesn't really work.
Andrew, take note.
It doesn't work because most people, if you set up a focus group, will tell you small changes to the existing thing. And so if you want to go to the stagecoach to the car, somebody's not likely to come up with the car. If you want to go from the Sony Walkman to the iPod, someone's not likely to come up with the iPod. And so, but the thing that you have to do is your focus group is yourself. You should make products that you want to use. And you not just want to use, but you love. And you can bet that if you love it, there are many other people out there that will love it too. And so that fundamental thing drives Apple. Now, in addition to that, because we do make mistakes on some things that we ship and so forth, and so you always want to stay close to your customers and listen to them and be very accessible to them. One of the key reasons we have retail stores is to touch our customer and hear from them. One of the reasons that I get up at ungodly hours is I like to spend my first hour going through customer emails, right? Because I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what they're feeling. And so these touch points, not just those two, but many throughout the company, are truly important. But for you starting a business, if that is your goal, my recommendation is recruit the friends of yours who are not like you. If you're in engineering, make sure you get somebody from the liberal arts. If you're from the UK, make sure you get somebody from the Middle East or from China or from America or wherever. Find people that are different than you and where the common thread is they want to change the world, and they want to change the world by creating the product or service that you also want. And if you can find that collection of people, and it can start really small, it might start with 2 or 3 people, that is the kernel of a successful company.
Sounds like a good rule. And Oxford is well set up for that because everybody here in this university is a minority. Everybody. We're all just part of a big melting pot. One of the other lessons that I think that young entrepreneurs in this room are going to have to learn is about failure and resilience. Not everything goes your way, and you got to expect that's going to happen. And different people have different ways to be resilient. What are your ways of being resilient in the face of less than positive outcomes?
I keep this voice in my ear that says, "This too shall pass. This too shall pass." And I have faith that it will. There will be times that you fail on a spectacular basis. I've certainly done it more than once. And in some ways, I have little failures every day, right? But you have to have the faith that it will pass, that it's not detrimental. And the only thing you have to do to remember that is to look in the mirror and watch the person breathe. It didn't kill you. You're not dead. And so it's not the biggest thing in the world. It will pass. And I do that many times a day sometimes when things aren't going well. I remember that they will pass. And once you do that for a while, you won't have to remind yourself anymore. You will be able to take these failures, and in fact, you'll kind of view them not as failures anymore. You'll start calling them things you learned. It won't be so detrimental anymore. And that is exactly how it is for me.
So let's take the flip side of that.
Yeah.
That's inspiration. So you have to be inspired, in part inspired by the people around you. But where do you draw inspiration?
What I do is I look to heroes, and I look to how our products are used. So I like to go out and meet with artists, to meet with people that are using our products. I like to meet with the doctor that's using our products. I like to meet with the musician who's using our products to create music. Someone who is using the tools that we made to do something big in the world, to change the world in some way, to heal, to teach. Those things inspire me. So last night I went to the Royal Academy, and I went from sort of artist to artist to artist to see how they were using the products. It's like unbelievable medicine. It's better than any Prozac I could ever buy. A few hours ago, I was in London, and I joined a group of kids that were learning how to code. They were learning how, on a language that we created called Swift, in a curriculum that we created called Swift Playgrounds, in a store that we created that is a learning environment kind of store. And seeing these kids light up and be engaged, I mean, this is inspiration. And then for people, or for things that are like human rights, I get very passionate on human rights. I have a photo of Dr. King on my wall. I have a photo of Bobby Kennedy on my wall, and I think about what they did, what they achieved in their lifetimes, and that they were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice of their own lives in the advancement of human rights. And when you look at it like that, speaking out on things that make you uncomfortable doesn't seem like that big a thing anymore.
Let's stay on that. I'd like to go back to the lessons for entrepreneurs, but since you've just brought this up, let's stay on it. In the current environment, there's a lot of strange stuff going on. And I think CEOs are being drawn out into public discussions that previously they didn't feel the need to be part of. That's because we thought a lot of this silliness had been settled before. When does it make sense for a CEO to come out publicly on an issue? Obviously, an issue about the firm, yeah, I get that. But about more general issues, what should the CEO do? Because as CEO, you're a public figure as well as being the leader of your organization.
Yeah, my view is that all of us, all humans, should have values. And it's an incredible gift that we get to select what they are, And because a corporation is nothing more than a collection of people, a corporation should have values too. And so I think when you see something going on that is in conflict with those values, I think you have a responsibility, an obligation to speak up. Because, silence is the ultimate form of consent. And if you say nothing as things occur, it's like a nod. It's like saying yes. Or that's how I view it anyway. And so I think the CEO role has changed. I think historically, CEOs focus mainly on revenues, profits, shareholders. And I think that's a very limited view of the world, or at least for Apple it is, because Apple was founded to change the world. That's why we exist. We make tools to empower other people to do incredible things. And so it doesn't seem consistent with that to me to be silent on things that matter. And I know people disagree with me on this. I get notes occasionally from shareholders that say, why are you saying this stupid thing? You're going to upset somebody that might not buy your product because you feel that way. But I think the vast majority of people, even when they disagree with what you say, if you're standing on principle and being authentic, I think people are really smart. I think what people don't like is phoniness, and I really don't believe they like people that don't stand for something. And so I know that it's a new world, and I know a lot of CEOs that are very uncomfortable, but it is the world. And by trying to say it doesn't exist or to make it Pollyanna-ish is doing no one any good.
In fact, yesterday, if my memory serves me correctly, it was the day before, you retweeted the Commandant General of the U.S. Air Force's speech to the Air Force Academy.
If you guys haven't seen this, I would highly recommend you watch this speech. It will make your heart sing hearing it. He was a lieutenant general, I believe, of the Air Force Academy, I believe. And he was speaking on diversity. And you should see it. If you don't have the link, I'm sure we can find it for you.
But he said at some length, like, if you don't respect one another, then get out. If you don't know how to deal with somebody who's different than you, then get out.
Yeah,
I think I'm getting
very
pretty
clear.
So would you be willing to go that far as Apple if you say, if you don't believe with our environmental policies, if you don't believe what I'm saying about DACA, get out?
No. And here's the reason. There's a difference. If I would be willing to say get out if you don't treat each other with dignity and respect, you need to leave. If you're in a position where you're deciding people's future and you're deciding in a biased way, you need to leave after the hanging in the quad, right? But I'm just kidding. But I think we have to allow for disagreement. And so we have to say, you know, we're running Apple, our goal is to run Apple on 100% renewable energy, because we think that's really important in our goal to leave the world better than we found it. It's okay if we have an engineer over somewhere that says, I don't believe in climate change, and I think you're doing the wrong thing. I support people having a different view. I don't support someone, their behavior, I support their opinion, right? And there's a difference. I think there's a huge distinction there, right? And you know, I think you have to allow for different opinions, and not only allow, but foster them. And that's how all of us get better, is to hear somebody beside us say, I view that differently.
So back to what some of these young people are going to have to do. Business schools talk about leadership all the time. And I think we use it as the capital L leader, like CEO leader. But if you're working in a small team, if you're working on a small team, you have to lead that team too. In your community group, you have to be a leader. What are your tips about leadership, not CEO leadership, because not too many of the folks around here, you know, are going to become CEOs of Apple. Maybe one someday, but they will be leaders in lots of other contexts.
Yeah, of course. First of all, I think leadership is fluid. There's I think some people get tripped up on that leadership is a sort of a static thing, or that the manager is the leader. And we don't run Apple like that. And so leadership moves and goes to and fro, because the truth is that depending upon what a team is doing, the person to lead may change. And so sometimes this person may be leading, sometimes they may be in a supportive role. And so I actually think it's very important that everyone have leadership skills. That it's not just for people that want to manage or want the people management side. People that want to stay in a pure technical field need leadership skills to do well. Someone that feels shy, right? Or I'm introverted. Introverts need to lead. Extroverts need to lead. Everybody needs to learn basic leadership skills, because it's core in moving your business forward. And so I think leadership is essential.
So what would be some of those basic leadership skills? I mean, we all have to be leaders in different contexts. So what have you learned about leadership? Both, you know, all the way coming up through IBM and Compaq and Apple. What are some hints to young people about leadership?
Leadership is about surrounding yourselves with the right people. First of all, leadership is about people. Leadership is about how you communicate. Leadership is sitting in a meeting when there's 5 of you around the table and 3 people are talking a lot, but 1 is quiet. Leadership is asking that person that's quiet what they're thinking, because there may be a reason they're not speaking. Maybe it's the only person, maybe it's the only woman in the room. That happens all too often in the tech field. Maybe it's someone that just feels shy on that topic or whatever. Or maybe it's someone that has a different opinion that doesn't want to express it. So I think leadership is drawing out people, because it's the combination of people that amplify performance. None of us have an S on our chest and a cape on our back. None of us do. The only way that we do great work is if we collectively do our best work and amplify each other. And so to me, leadership is that amplification. It's figuring out everything you need to do with the people you work with to amplify their performance. And it's it's maybe different for one person versus the other, right? We're all different.
If there was ever a leader that had an S on his chest and a cape on his back, it's your partner in crime, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And you've spoken about him many times and all the amazing things that he did as a leader. I'm going to guess that you two, while you worked closely together, have slightly different leadership styles.
Why does somebody laugh?
But in any event, I mean, we all work with different people. So what did you take away from learning? What did you take away from the experience that you had working with Steve Jobs? And what of it, how did you internalize the parts that fit for you and the parts that didn't?
Working with Steve was a privilege of a lifetime. I mean, it was like it was indescribable. There's not words in the language that describe it. Steve taught me things that probably most people wouldn't guess. Steve taught me that the joy was in the journey, that it wasn't in the final thing, that the joy was really the daily stuff. Steve taught me the importance of focus, and that it didn't matter who you are, and it didn't matter whether it's your personal life or your business life, that you can only do a few things well, and that you had to be ruthless as you choose what things you're going to be great at. Because if you spread yourself too thin personally or professionally, you will not do great work. He taught me things about technology. He taught me that Apple needed to own the primary technologies of its products. He taught me that best was more important than most for Apple. We've never had a goal to sell the most of something. Sometimes it occurs, but frequently it doesn't. Our goal is to sell the best. We want a product that we're really proud of, and so that means selecting and figuring out what to do. He taught me that the best groups are more like a band, not a group of chiclets. You think about a band, you have people that are experts playing their musical instruments, and you have people that are creatively very different, person to person to person, and the best, and a band has to trust each other. You have to have a great deal of trust to the person to your left and to your right, that they're going to do their thing to make that performance great. And Apple runs on trust with minimal overlap. We don't believe in the checker thing. We're more of a puzzle that comes together, not an overlapping thing, right? And so for that model to work, we have to put incredible trust in one another to do that. And I could go on. I mean, I felt like I was learning at a faster rate than I'd ever learned before, and learning not just things, actually, I would say almost everything that I learned from Steve resulted in things in my personal life as well. Because Steve loved what he did so much. There was the overlap between personal and work they were synonymous. And so in his teachings, I'm sure he wouldn't call them that, really affected both. And it was, I'm not exaggerating a bit, it was a privilege of a lifetime. Now, we have different styles, and difference was celebrated, not ostracized. He selected me to be CEO. He didn't select someone like him. I don't think anyone is like him. And I've always felt that Steve was not replaceable, and I still feel like that today. I don't feel like I replaced him. I think when you follow someone, particularly someone that has done a great job, if you have the pleasure of doing that, your role is not to do what they did. It's to be yourself and do what you do, and things that you don't do as well as they do, you want to make sure that the puzzle around you fits. Things that you might be able to do better, you want to find ways to amplify those. And so I think Steve did me an incredible favor in telling me a couple of times toward the end to not ever ask what he would do, to just do what I thought was right. And that was like removing this huge weight. And I have stayed true to that commitment I made to him, that I would not do that.
And you've done a remarkable job. I'm about to turn it over to the audience. So the last question, and by the way, this is the warm call part, so you're supposed to be thinking about your questions now. You've given these young people some incredible advice, this entire last 30 minutes about being true to yourself, about assembling people around you who are different, about calling, being a leader in all ways, about starting maybe by trying to do the right thing for you, but trying to do the right thing for the world. If you were to talk to the Tim Cook from 1982, coming out of university, which is probably about where a lot of these people are, beyond the things you've already said, what advice would you give them?
It took me 15 years after graduating from undergraduate school to recognize the purpose of my life, which I think is actually the purpose of all of our lives. And that's probably the only thing that I would have changed. I would have turned that light switch on 15 years earlier. Now, I've made so many mistakes, but the mistakes have all contributed to learning and moving forward, and so I wouldn't change any of those actually. But that one, I would have learned when I was 21 or earlier.
Okay. With that, we turn it over to some amazing people out there. Remember the 3 rules: introduce yourself, make it a question, and make it short. So with that. And the lights are in here, so it may be hard for me to see. And do we have mics? We do have mics. Great. Becky. Why don't we start with the woman kind of right back here. Yeah, you. Hold on. There you go.
So, oh wow, cool, technology.
We're in the Foundry, guys.
My name is Hyeon Kim. I'm from the U.S. I'm studying my immigration studies as a postgrad here. And so my question is related to failure. I'm just wondering, have you ever encountered a situation when you failed, and how do you discern whether it's a type of failure where you can learn from and kind of enhance the product and move on, or if it's a failure where it's kind of like a dead end and you have to sort of abandon the ship? Thank you.
That is a great question. Some people will tell you, never stop, failure is never final. That's not true. Failure, you have to recognize when something that you're working on is pushing on a wall. And let me give you an example of one that was actually pretty big at Apple at the time. We shipped a product called the Cube. Some of you may remember it if you followed Apple a lot. It was a very important product to us. We put a lot of love into it. We put enormous engineering into it. It was an engineering marvel. It was a spectacular failure commercially. I mean, from the first day almost. And within 3 months, we withdrew it. And so we had to look at ourselves in the mirror and saying, we missed this one. And I think it's important to be able to do that. It's important to be able, something that you were so passionate about, and this was another thing Steve taught me actually, that you're so passionate about, you've sold it to everybody, you've got to be willing to look yourself in the mirror and say, I was wrong. It's not right. And so how do you identify which ones to keep pushing on and which ones not? There's not a clear answer. What I would say that the top thing to do is be intellectually honest. I see so many people, when they commit themselves to something, that they have their pride will not allow them to say, this just doesn't work. Because they think about who they told, and their friends are all going to say they're failures, and their parents are going to say they're failures, and their business colleagues. And failure is a common thing. It's like the common cold. We just don't all like to admit it all the time, but it's that common. And so I do think it's very important to make sure you're constantly being intellectually honest and you've got the courage to change. Steve, of everyone I have known in life, could be the most avid proponent of some position, and within minutes or days, if new information came up, you would think that he never ever thought that before. Talking about moving the hat, he was a pro at this, and at first I thought, wow, he really flip-flops. And then all of a sudden I saw the beauty in it, because he wasn't getting stuck like so many other people do when they just say, I've got to keep going on, my pride, So be intellectually honest and have the courage to change.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. Actually, there's somebody whose hand's up right by the camera there. Yeah, I can't see you. It's the advantage of being unseen. Go ahead.
Hello, my name's Arjun Reddy. I'm from the United States. I'm from the United States as well. I'm at the business school, and I'm actually a fellow Dukey too. So my question is, a lot of young entrepreneurs, when we present our ideas to investors, a lot of times we'll hear, well, what's your exit plan? The insinuation being, how are you going to sell your product to an Apple or a Google in 5 years? What impact do you think that has on the kinds of ideas that get filtered through the pipeline and ultimately get funded, if any?
If you have a VC asking you that, you should get up and walk out of the room. When I first moved to Silicon Valley, it was back in early '98, as the dean pointed out earlier, and we were a year or two later, the dot-com boom was going full steam. And I would occasionally go out socially or something, and I would hear this term exit plan. I had never heard it before. And people were talking about, young people like you were talking about their exit plan. And I think, this is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. Because, my own view of things were, you work really hard to have a great business that does good, and you keep working at it, and it gets better and better. And so I would get up and walk out. The money you should not be attracted to that kind of money, because those people are not for growing your company and helping you. They're for a quick buck, and it's not worth it.
Great. Okay. How about this woman right here? Yeah, I think it's right behind you.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. My name is Catherine, and I'm also from the United States. Yes, that's right. And I'm an undergraduate visiting student studying international affairs. And my question is slightly similar to the previous question of how do you balance an ability to be a successful business while also having an impact, especially in the service of humanity?
Yeah, I decided a long time, or actually after joining Apple, when I saw what was going on at Apple, is that I think every product or service or thing you pour yourself into should serve humanity in some way. And so you might build a product that empowers people to do things they couldn't do before. You might build a product that helps feed people that need to be fed. You might build a product that helps people learn faster. But what I found with myself The only thing that kept me motivated in the long term was if I was doing something that benefited somebody else. That it's a very empty thing if you're running a business for money. Yes, it's important because you want to pay people and so forth, but it is not sustaining. It doesn't motivate you over the long haul. And so I would suggest strongly that your charter of your business focus on humanity. How are you going to help somebody? If you do that, that will be the magnet that you need to pull you through the tough nights. And it will be the thing that will attract the best people. The reason Apple has great people is because we have a purpose, is because we're about changing the world and making the world better. That's why Apple exists. If it is not money that is attracting people, I mean, we pay okay and all that kind of stuff for you guys that want to come to work for us, but it is not, it doesn't sustain. It doesn't sustain people over long periods of time.
I am not checking my email, by the way, on this Apple product. But what I am doing is I'm getting questions from other. Yes, we got a Twitter feed. So I'll tell you what. Let's take one more, and while we're taking that one, I will kind of look at the Twitter feed. No, actually in the back. The woman back there, please.
Just a second. Hello, my name is Rimu Boiddo and I'm from Bangladesh. So I'm running a small social enterprise in Bangladesh addressing adolescent reproductive health. So one of the problems we find is when you are working with that, bottom 40 to 50% of the pyramid, that people don't perceive service as a product. So what would be your suggestion for a young entrepreneur like me who wants to take a social entrepreneurial journey, who wants to make a change in the society and also in a sustained way? Thank you.
And let me make sure I understand what you want to do. You are bringing awareness for reproductive health?
Around big products like sanitary napkins and all, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's very challenging.
Yeah, I think, where's Malala? Is she here? I spent some time with Malala earlier. I think her focus on local activists is the most important key, because you need people on the ground there that know the environment, that know the people, that know how to get things done there. I think that's like the single most important thing. And then, of course, you need the funding and stuff like that goes with it, but you have to start with the local activist.
Okay, for those of you who are online, hashtag Oxfo, O-X-F-O. So let's take one more because they're still loading. All right, so how about the gentleman with the paper in his hand? I haven't called on any adults yet, so you're the representative adult for the moment. There's a mic coming towards you. It's probably going to get thrown at you.
Looks like a box.
Can I ask, how much conflict do you find is useful in your company, and how do you go about resolving conflicts when you think it's got past the point of usefulness?
Really great question. I think you get the best ideas if your environment thrives on debate. I think that if your goal is to minimize conflict, you will not get a good result, because it will take out the creative tension that happens between people that actually make 1 + 1 more than 2. And so but in order for it to be productive, you have to make it not only acceptable, but desirable to debate things. I mean, think about what you do in student groups. I would guess some of your best work comes out of debating each other. And you want to bring that into your work, into the workplace with you. For too long, work was viewed as hierarchical, and you never disagreed with the boss. We don't do that at Apple, let me tell you, we don't do that. At Apple is the only place where an employee can fire their manager. And they fire them, I don't mean literally, but they care about things so much that if somebody's not contributing in a way, they will essentially render them not well. That didn't exactly come out right. But so that creative tension and conflict and debate, I think, is essential. It's not just desirable, it's essential to coming out with the best product. Now, you have to make sure that the debaters don't start talking personal insults. Now, that's not acceptable. But debating passionately your position on something is not only acceptable, it's required.
So off the Twitter sphere, so you mentioned that part of your inspiration comes from heroes. You mentioned 3 heroes. Sadly, all of them have passed away. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and Steve Jobs. Are there any living heroes that you look to for inspiration?
You know, I hate to say this, but it's the truth, so I'm going to, and I've been very straightforward, is I have not had success with living heroes. And because I think it's better to pick a dead person. And the reason is, no, seriously, I'm serious about this. The reason is dead people don't disappoint you. And so because you're using this person as this constant inspiration, what has happened to me previously, or more than once before I really learned what was going on, is you would hold them so high, and then one day you would find out it wasn't real, that you had built them up to something that they're not. There is one person I've met that my expectation was so high, and he exceeded it, and that I would call a hero that's living, and that's the Pope. The Pope, I would say, when you meet him, there's a feeling that comes over you that is indescribable. I mean, regardless of your religion, I'm not pushing a certain religion, but meeting someone that is so pure and only focused on improving lives, I think he meets that bar. But otherwise, I would say, focus on the dead.
Which is why we study history at Oxford. Okay, more questions in the room. How about this gentleman right here? Right? Yeah. Yep, you. Can we throw him a mic? Here we go.
Hi, I'm William. I'm one of the deans at new MBAs. My question for you is, we're living in a really sort of rapidly evolving world, many new technologies coming into play. Of all the new ones, blockchain, AI, Hyperloop, quantum computing, which in your mind is most exciting, will be the most transformative, and why?
I'm incredibly excited about AR, one that you didn't mention. I'm excited about AR because I can see uses for it everywhere. I can see uses for it in education, in consumers, in entertainment, in sports. I can see it in every business that I know anything about. I see it is wide, it's horizontal in nature. I also like the fact that it doesn't isolate. I don't like our products being used a lot. I like our products amplifying us. And I think AR can help amplify the human connection. I've never been a fan of VR like that because I think it does the opposite. There are clearly some cool, niche-y kind of things for VR, but it's not profound in my view. AR is profound. We will look back on sort of this moment, or the moment that we announced ARKit earlier in the year, and this will be one of those things in history, I think. It'll take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. But this is big, and it's good for humanity.
So we're just about out of time. We'll take one more question. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Pressure is on.
Actually, Tim, you want to pick this one?
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I'm just trying to see. There's somebody in the very, very back. It's yours. Yeah, can we get him a mic back there? Throw him that mic.
Ooh.
Don't hit anybody. We haven't done the whole health and safety thing here yet.
Thank you very much. Hi, so I'm Alex. I'm a third-year history undergraduate, and I'm also the editor of one of the student newspapers here in Oxford. You talked earlier about responsible capitalism, and I think it's a very pressing topic at the moment. I wanted to ask, at what point do you think entrepreneurship, which is sort of what this is about, come into conflict with the monopolies that in many cases dominate to the detriment of those markets, some markets, mainly maybe, I don't know, like telecoms or the music industry in particular. And do you think there's a solution, and what can be done even by entrepreneurs to challenge that?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Did you?
Okay, like this. Is that better? The last bit, or all of it? Oh my God, sorry. The very last bit, or all
It
of
may be
it?
my southern ear that's having a hard time translating.
Yeah.
I think it's the audio.
So basically, at what point do you think entrepreneurship comes into conflict with monopolies, and how do you think, what can be done to help the entrepreneurs?
That's a really good question. I think that monopolies in and of themselves aren't necessarily a bad thing, but I think they can be a really bad thing. And I think when there's any move at all, I'm not a big fan of regulation, but I think when there's any move at all toward that side, I think that regulation is necessary. Now for us, we have low market share, because we're about the best, not the most. And, but I think it's essential that competitive markets exist. That, and where it doesn't, I think that is a prime role for government to step in and not only protect the consumer there, but also protect society at large. Because sometimes it can be more than about the price somebody pays for something. Sometimes that can be the least issue. So I think you're asking a huge question that's obviously on a lot of people's minds right now, me included. And I think all of us, or the regulators, have to decide where in that spectrum are different companies. Each company's in a different position. And so each one has to be looked at individually instead of, I think, as a group. But it's a really good question.
Now, we've been really fortunate to have Tim here. This is his first trip to Oxford. Why don't we show him how grateful we are and make sure it's not his last trip to Oxford?